Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, sometimes you wonder, are my kids going to be, properly grounded when they grow up and, not be, crazy, have unrealistic expectations. My daughter had a doctor's appointment today and I said, "Well, I know this is no fun, so you can pick wherever you want to go. Wherever you want to go for lunch, we'll go on the way home." Did she pick, Mitchell's? No. Did she pick some spectacular seafood place? No. Sheets. I was like, all right, cool. Well, cross that off the list of stuff I need to worry about. We're not raising a brat. That's good. I was like, I mean, that's the kind of place that I would pick. So I guess it kind of makes sense.
That is tremendous job of your wife raising that child, by the way, Tom. This is just amazing. I personally do eventually want to get 2 sheets for a breakfast burrito, but it's like a 20-minute drive for me. And it's up 23, and 23 can take a long time at times, but that's awesome. That's, you know, I assume you feel like the sense of pride, like you're like, oh, we've done it. In this crazy, crazy world, this mixed up, terrible world that we live in, you've done it.
Well, we haven't screwed it up yet. There's still time, but we haven't screwed it up yet. So far so good, I guess.
Where do you want to go for lunch? BP. No, I want a Speedway hot dog.
Yeah, I think that's in that middle realm where it's not like, I don't want to have I don't want my children to be eating like raccoons, but also like let's have realistic expectations. So yeah, I think we've kind of middled this nicely and ended up at a reasonable spot that you're comfortable with on both sides of the spectrum. So
Yeah, so Tom, here we are. We're going to be doing a listener question show. We've done a lot of recruiting stuff because Ohio State just keeps getting commitments. So if you want to hear us talk about Carnell Tate committing, we did that on Monday. You want to hear us talk about Brandon Innes committing, we did that on Tuesday. You want to hear us talking about Noah Rogers committing, you could do that on the morning scoop for quote unquote Thursday, but was dropped at Wednesday at 4 p.m. So you can go ahead and listen to that as well as we talk about the incredible recruiting week that is Brian Hartline, and it's not just this week. Obviously, he continues on, but so that's we've talked it out. I don't know how much more we can talk about receiver recruiting. I do feel like we will continue to talk about it eventually, Tom.
well, and we one thing we haven't talked about that Carnell Tate brought up on Twitter was everyone sort of looks at that and goes Brian Hartline, and we do the same thing because it's like this is the this when you talk about the program, you talk about the head coach. When you talk about the position group, you talk about the position coach for that group. Keenan Bailey's there too, and boy, talk to anyone around the Ohio State program about Keenan Bailey, and it's like, oh man, this kid's going places. And they are in the process of getting rid of the rule with the 10 countable assistant coaches. When he can be, potentially that opens up a little bit more of a payday for him, and potentially a bigger official on-field role for him. That's going to be, I think, a very big deal for Ohio State. He is someone who they are very, very high on, who is a big part of that process as well. I mean, at camp on Tuesday, Keenan Bailey was there talking with Carnell Tate quite a while. Obviously, they have a very good relationship, as well as Brian Hartline with Carnell Tate. But that's true of all of those guys. He is a big part of that room as well. So there we go. Wanted to make sure we acknowledge that as well. Carnell Tate brought it up. It was like, that is actually a tremendous point. We need to talk about him as well. And then you get into all the other assistant coaches and you see Todd Fitch out there working with the quarterbacks. And when we talk about quarterback recruiting, we talk about Ryan Day first, and then also Corey Dennis. You got people like Todd Fitch there. There is a whole team of people at Ohio State, and they all play an important role in there. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, for sure. And I talked about it. I guess it would have been on Mark Rogers' show today because it wouldn't have been with you. But I mentioned Keenan Bailey because you have these Ohio State fans right now that are like, oh, this is so great with Brian Hartline. But then they're like, oh no, we're going to lose Brian Hartline soon. And you can't enjoy one without thinking, oh no, he's eventually going to go somewhere because he's going to want to raise and he's going to want this and he's going to want that. And that's when I mentioned, well, if Brian Hartline eventually does leave in 3 or 4 or 5 years, they've got a guy named Keenan Bailey. And Keenan Bailey, as you said, he's been talked about for years at Ohio State, and he has stuck around. He could have left for full-time assistant coaching jobs and they've done a great job of keeping him, and he will eventually be a full-time assistant at Ohio State as well. But yeah, he is active. The players love him, recruits love him, existing players love him, coaches can't say enough good things about him. So I imagine Ryan Day, when he found out, like, we're eventually going to remove this cap on assistants, he's like, oh, this is a great day for me. It's a great day for Keenan Bailey and the other guys, but to be able to lock those guys in like that is certainly a great thing. But yeah, so good job by you, Tom, mentioning that. Is it time for listener questions while we can get some in?
Well, I'm reading the episode title and it says listener questions, so I guess we should probably, truth in advertising and all that kind of stuff. I guess we should answer some listener questions. Here's a good one from @Nat3Reyes. What position is the most likely to have future transfers at the moment? And we will preface this with longstanding policy. We're not going to talk about specific guys. That's not fair to anyone involved. So we're going to keep this a little more general. To me, Tony, I think the answer has to be just go with the numbers here. Offensive line, right? I mean, you've got that's a place where you've got, I don't remember how many linemen they have on scholarship right now, but they generally keep it in that like 16, 17 range. If you've been there a couple of years and you are somewhere down that line where you're not in that top 6, 7, 8 guys who are sort of in that circle of trust, those are the kind of guys where at least you're probably starting to think about that. So just purely from a numbers perspective, I think that's the first place that I think of when I read that question.
Yeah, that's my answer as well, because it is probably, I don't want to say probably or arguably, I think it is the most difficult position to project in recruiting. A lot of times you're recruiting size and feet, and sometimes it just doesn't come together. And you have to take risks, take gambles. Sometimes it becomes DeJuan Jones. Sometimes it doesn't. And you sign a guy who will never play, and you realize that probably by about day 8, when they're actually in the mix, they're practicing. So you do have a lot of swings and misses. And so those are the guys that you will weed out some, but also you have guys like Ryan Jacoby, who just couldn't get on the field and transfers to Pitt and then becomes a starter. And you'll see that as well. So like you said, 16, 17 guys on scholarship, at most like 7 or 8 are going to play. And the guys who realize that they can't play and won't play, they will move on. Other guys will realize, you know what, I can play, I just can't play here. I'm going to go move on, especially if somebody younger than you has jumped you and you have no clear way. So and then you also have to cast a wide net in recruiting. And sometimes you take some guys that, we'll see. Like they're looking at guys in camp all June long, and they've got some guys that they don't want to offer yet. They'd rather see them as seniors. But if they continue if you've missed on a number of guys, you get down towards the bottom of your list and you're like, well, we better jump on this. We better jump on this. And so there's risks, there's gambles almost every year on the offensive line. And if you don't take a risk in one year, it's because you may have taken too many risks the year before, or, you're just, there's just nobody that is like worth the risk. So you bring in guys that, will never play to replace guys that have never played. And you just hope that you've got 8 or 9 good ones after it's all settled.
And a lot of times this conversation becomes a little bit cyclical where this all starts with there's a bad stretch in recruiting in a certain position group. They got real thin at line on the offensive line at one point and brought in a whole bunch of guys to get the total number of bodies in that room up. And when you're sort of, you're maybe sort of pushing the boundaries there, some of those guys aren't going to end up working out and they're going to transfer out. You sort of saw that in the defensive backfield in the last couple of years as well, where you had that, a bunch of corners who they didn't get under, in that Taver Johnson year, and they had a couple down years there. And then you had to take some real big classes. And then, if you take 6 guys in the defensive backfield or 7 guys in the defensive backfield or 8 guys in the defensive backfield in one class, they're not all going to be able to play. And so you're going to sort of naturally have some attrition there as well. So some of it can sort of be, long tail results of previous struggles in recruiting, by previous staffs, where that sort of forces you to push the boundaries a little bit, which then you have a lot of guys who are kind of, some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. And the ones who don't, with a room that's crowded, are going to move on, because Brian Jacoby was exactly the name that came to mind to me as well, where just because you're leaving Ohio State doesn't mean you're not a good player. Ryan Jacoby left, was starting on a team that won the ACC and went to the Peach Bowl last year. Like that, he is, you can not start at Ohio State and still be a very good player. We saw a quarterback at camp this week, Trevor Jackson, who was going to Pittsburgh, who, you look at him and it's like, he is a fantastically talented quarterback, very strong arm, very mobile, very agile. He's a fantastic college football player in the making. He's probably not going to come to Ohio State because he's probably, there's not really an opportunity, because you've already had Dylan Raiola for 2024. You kind of run into that type of issue at some of the other position groups as well. Next one from @Ronnie Glickman. What will be the most interesting non-starter positional battle this fall?
One that comes to mind is it probably becomes a starter battle, so I won't go too deep into it, but I still want to know what's happening. Where is Cody Simon when he is healthy? What's going to happen to him? But he would challenge for a starting job, so I won't go there. I don't think you can go with really any of the defensive linemen, because Tom, I'm getting very annoyed when I'm seeing people talking about who's going to be starting on the defensive line when we continually say, don't worry about it. Like it's title and name only. Like the numbers, like Teron Vincent was Ohio State's starting defensive tackle last year, but Haskell Garrett was considered the starter by everybody because, that's just, he was an All-American the year before. They all play. So and if you're going to go with defensive line here, I apologize. I'm sorry. But, there are, of course, it's interesting to see, how does Caden Curry do against, playing, can he move past Javonte Jean-Baptiste or something like that? There's always that at play. I'm interested to see what's going on with Jansen Dunn. He's a guy we don't talk about. Kai Stokes came in as a true freshman this year, was productive, exciting, maybe the number 2 free safety. But Jansen Dunn, when he came in, he was there was a lot of excitement about him. I really liked him. We saw him get some time in that free safety role. Also, he wrapped in some in the cover safety role in that nickel spot. So I don't know really where he's going to be. He wasn't healthy this spring. So I'm interested to see, because we haven't talked about him at all when we talk about all of the safeties that Ohio State has. I'm interested to see what he can do. Can he climb up the depth chart, wherever that may be? So he's one that I'm watching. What about you, Tom?
That's a really good answer. I'm going to touch briefly on the offensive line here, because we just talked a bunch about the offensive lines. I don't want to go too deep on this because I got another answer as well. But, the line, you have a very good sense for who the top 5 guys are. But then next year, you're potentially losing both tackles. You're losing one of your guards. So you're going to have a bunch of open spots on the line next year. And it feels like, who is 6 through 8 on that offensive line? Who else is in that circle of trust for them by the time the season starts behind those starting 5? Feels like Enoch Vamahi's probably there. It feels like Josh Fryer's probably going to be there. He missed the spring, but he's probably in that conversation as well. Who else is there in that group? Because then those are the guys who, a year from now, when we're talking about how are they going to replace DeJuan Jones and Matt Jones and Paris Johnson, potentially, we'll see how who turns pro and who doesn't. But potentially, when you're having that conversation, those are the names where you're probably plugging those guys in somewhere. Is Donovan Jackson, does he kick outside and then one of those guys slides in a guard, or is Enoch Vamahi going to play tackle? All of this sort of is still TBD in a lot of ways. But that to me, I think is can Ben Crispin step up into that group? Is that something where you have some of those guys who we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about? Can they step up there? Zen Mahalski, like all those younger offensive linemen, which of those guys can sort of earn their way into the circle of trust there? So that's kind of one answer. I think another answer is, we talk a lot about the top 4 wide receivers and Marvin Harrison and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming. I want to see Jaden Ballard. I want to see, it feels like one of the 4 freshman wide receivers is going to come in and, really make a push for playing time. Not necessarily earning a starting role, but can one of those guys jump Jaden Ballard, or is Jaden Ballard going to be the one who's kind of pushing for starting time? Wide receiver positions 5 and 6 this year. I think we talked about Brian Hartline bringing in all this talent. there is a lot of talent in this room. Which of those guys is going to be the cream rising to the top of the the second tier of that wide receiver room behind the starting group? I think those are my two answers there.
Yeah, I like that. I'm very interested to see which of the freshmen emerge, the freshman receivers, and you can go ahead and just assume it'll be Caleb Burton and Keon Graves because they were here this spring. But I'm anxious to see Kojo Antwi and Caleb Brown, because again, we talked about Caleb Brown before. He's different. Like they know what they like at receiver, but he's a little bit different because he's played some running back. So how is that going to evolve in this offense, and will it evolve immediately?
I think there's just so much possibility there. There's so much talent there, and that's a position where, offensive line, you don't see those freshmen come in and just immediately play on the offensive line. For the most part, you will occasionally, but for the most part, you don't see those guys come in. We have seen guys make an impact towards the end of that freshman year at the wide receiver position. So I think that's a spot where you have a lot more opportunity for guys to make a quick leap up that list. Next one, again from @Ronnie Glickman. One more for you guys. Which quarterback were you most excited/intrigued to see in year 2 of Ryan Day's offense, Fields or Stroud? This feels like a very clear answer to me, but I think it's also, a lot of that is kind of tinged around the fact that Fields' second year was 2020, and they had that weird wonky offseason, and you didn't have, you didn't have the full spring ball, you didn't have the full summer workouts, you had all the weird stuff going on that year that you knew was going to kind of hold everyone back to a certain degree. You have no reservations, you have no concerns about CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is going to, it is guns ablazing. You've got all that, that we just talked about, all the talented wide receivers. You've got what should be a very good offensive line. You've got a very good running back. What's the big concern on offense? Like, well, who's going to catch the ball as a tight end? I mean, that's, guess what? The answer is the same thing as it has been for the last 30 years. No one. It's fine. They have a million wide receivers. It'll be fine. Like, I think just CJ Stroud himself is right there with Justin Fields. I don't know that one or the other, I would say, like, individually they are, one is so much more exciting than the other or intriguing than the other. But just the whole, the talent around him and the fact that they've had this whole offseason, it feels like that to me is, CJ Stroud is ahead of Justin Fields, and it's not necessarily because of anything Justin Fields did or didn't do. It's just everything else around CJ Stroud makes this so exciting and so intriguing.
Justin Fields, I think in that second year in 2020, under normal circumstances, would have been the perfect weapon at quarterback because he would have been involved in the running game, but was also an elite passing quarterback. And Ohio State has never really had, he was the perfect weapon. They've never had somebody that could throw like him while also running like him. Not that he's common, like nobody really has that kind of quarterback. But yeah, that year, it was just really hard to get excited about anything because I remember asking Gene Smith in March after I think basketball was canceled and being like, so football's going to be okay, right? And basically like, oh, we're not even, we can't think that far in advance. And you're thinking, oh, it's going to be fine. Like they'll figure, this, we'll get it under wraps. And, football, it's so far away. We're talking like, 5 months from now, camp starts. I'm sure it'll be fine. And then, it was soon after it wasn't, and you couldn't almost be excited. And then he gets to play, and you never know who he's going to be playing with from week to week, or if he was going to be playing week to week. So it's hard to get excited when you're on eggshells the entire time. You're just like, you're not trying to move quickly at all. And then this year for CJ Stroud, yeah, I think we saw him the way he finished the season against Utah. He had an interception, but like he got pretty close to not perfect, but as perfect as you can play as a quarterback. He's completing nearly 75% of his passes in his final 10 games or final 8 games or so, and just really, really precise. And you expect him to continue from right there. And that's probably unfair, though, Tom.
It is probably a little bit unfair. And that, there's the next question is actually sort of a pressure on Ohio State quarterbacks. So I think this is a smooth transition here from @JSpang37. Does the lack of NFL success at the quarterback position by Buckeye quarterbacks put more/too much pressure on Stroud or Day? If Stroud and or Fields doesn't have real success there, does the 5-star quarterback pipeline to Ohio State dry up? That's an interesting question because, Fields had 1 year with the Bears and was not a great season. Tony, you're a Bears fan, or nominally a Bears fan. How much of the fact that the Bears did not have a very good offense last year was on Justin Fields, and how much was on the fact that they had maybe the worst offensive line in the history of organized football?
Yeah, they had a very terrible offensive line, a poor offensive philosophy, basically. Everybody gets fired for it. So, yeah, he had, and his receivers, they've actually gotten worse this year. So you've got to give him help. But, yeah, go ahead and continue, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think there's sort of that's a little bit of a narrative thing that maybe you'll get people talking about. But, I think back to Jimbo Fisher at Florida State. And Jimbo Fisher had a bunch of quarterbacks who were first-round draft picks. E.J. Manuel, Christian Ponder. And a lot of them didn't pan out to the NFL level. But the narrative was always, Jimbo gets him paid. Jimbo gets him that first contract, the first-round picks, and then after that, well, then go with God. Like, after that, your NFL team has to take care of you. If you're still churning out first-round picks, and you're getting $25, $30 million a year, at some point, I think you'd probably sign up for that and say, well, I mean, quarterbacks are known for having a lot of confidence in themselves. You're gonna believe that you're the guy who can get the $30 million and then continue above and beyond that at the NFL level.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like, recruiting is so far ahead of NFL production that even if that pipeline dried up, you would have so much oil pumped by that time. Like, Ohio State has their 2024 quarterback in the fold, and he won't be hitting the NFL at the earliest until 2028. So, like, there's things move very slowly and in that realm. And but I think I don't think either would admit to it, but I think from those of us looking at the outside, you're like, well, at some point you need an Ohio State quarterback to do something in the NFL. For the longest time, it was no first rounders. Well, you get a first rounder in Dwayne Haskins. We know what happened there. You get another first rounder with Justin Fields, and you see that another first rounder is coming with CJ Stroud. So it's like, oh, they've, QBU. It's going to be every quarterback under Ryan Day is a first rounder. However, if they all continue to not pan out, it's a lot like, remember back in the day, Penn State defensive linemen, where they didn't pan out. You're talking like guys at the top of the class not panning out, number one draft picks. And I'm not going to throw Larry Johnson under the bus, but there was a stigma there for a lot of those guys until some of them started to pan out. But I think right now, Justin Fields is getting the benefit of the doubt, which I think he should. And you've still got to put stuff around the quarterbacks. As everybody says, they're a product of those around them. They have a lot more around them at Ohio State than they have in the NFL, as unfortunately at this point for those guys. But I think there is some pressure. I think there is a need, but I think as long as Ryan Day is at Ohio State, like, he's going to get the guys. It's just a matter of whether you're going to hear the daggers from people saying, well, yeah, you can get them there, but you're not sending good NFL quarterbacks to the NFL. And it's like, well, at some point, like, Ryan Day can only coach them to this line. And then it's up to everybody else, including the player themselves.
Right. And you have to put talent around these guys. This is, at Ohio State, you have a talent advantage, a significant talent advantage in 9 to 10 games at least every season. Then you get into the, when the talent is equated games that Ryan Day talks about. The talent's equated at every game, basically, in the NFL. There's no NFL equivalent of Ohio State versus Rutgers, Ohio State versus Arkansas State. You're not playing games where you're favored by 35 points in the NFL. So, some of that is just like, you see, Aaron Rodgers, like, they got to get him a wide receiver. Like, you've got to help out your players a little bit. Justin Fields right now has no help, and I think everyone recognizes that's not something that's necessarily going to get held against Justin Fields. It's going to get held against Matt Nagy, and he's going to get fired. So, now let's see what they do next there. Next one from @OH Sports Takes. Who are the top offensive tackles off the bench? I know it's technically my turn to answer first, but I just talked a bunch about the backup offensive linemen, so I guess I'll let you handle this one.
Yeah, well, if you're considering off the bench, I guess that takes Donovan Jackson off the table since he's in the starting lineup at left guard. He would be one of the options at tackle. Josh Fryer has played tackle. Enoch Vamahi has played tackle. I think, I don't know which they like more there between those two. That's one of those battles that Tom talked about in terms of, these guys aren't starters, but the sixth guy is as close as it can get. And who is, is that sixth guy dependent on, is he a better tackle than the other? If Josh Fryer is a better tackle than Enoch Vamahi, but Enoch Vamahi is a better guard than Josh Fryer, is there a sixth man? Or is it a situation where Fryer would only go in if it's a tackle and Vamahi would only go in if it's guard? Or would they move, Donovan Jackson to tackle and put Vamahi in at guard or whatever? So they've got some options there. I continue to be intrigued by George Fitzpatrick after what we saw in the spring game. The true freshman came in. Tom, you mentioned Ben Christman and Zen Mahalski. Didn't get to see much of those guys this spring, so they're going to have to speed it up this fall. But Zen Mahalski is a guy with good size that has grown, and they like his overall potential. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know. Whenever you ask me about a backup, if we're talking about a backup offensive lineman, wherever it is, I just start with Vamahi and Fryer, because no matter who goes out, one of those two guys can go in. Because if Luke Whippler gets hurt, you move Matt Jones over and you bring in Vamahi or Fryer. If Paris Johnson gets hurt, you move Donovan Jackson over and you put in Vamahi or Fryer. So, I do wonder, Tom, who is the backup? Who is the number 3 offensive tackle? Is it Fryer who has more experience there, or is it Vamahi who has some recent experience there? He's the oldest guy. Is there an answer yet?
I don't know that Justin Fry knows the answer to that question with 100% certainty right now, because you're talking a lot about Josh Fryer there. Justin Fry hasn't seen Josh Fryer. Josh Fryer's been hurt the whole time Justin Fry's been here. So I genuinely don't know if I think someone would have to go in. So yes, there is nominally a 6th offensive lineman there, but I don't know if they could say with great certainty, this is definitely who's going to be the 6th and 7th and 8th guys out. And if, this spot's out, then this is how we shuffle things. That's probably something that's going to get sorted out a little bit in fall camp once some of these guys are back and healthy.
Yeah, Josh Fryer was out all spring, and Justin Fryer hasn't seen half of these guys.
Yep, exactly. So, yeah, that's I think one of the really complicating factors here, where if it's, if it was, a holdover coaching staff from last year, at least they'd have that history. And yeah, you can go back and watch practice film or whatever from a year ago, but you're watching film and you're watching year-old film. And, who knows, how has the injury impacted his ability to do whatever? Because he was a shoulder injury, right? I think it was a shoulder injury, but, how has that impacted things? Is he, or has he gotten bigger and faster and quicker since then? There are a lot of pieces that are going into this, and, they don't have to have the answer yet. So that's good, because I don't think they have the answer yet. Next one from Skank Horpio. What traditions do we want to see included in the EA Sports college football game next year? Boy, I've got a lot of answers here. Our buddy Matt Brown from the Extra Points newsletter, someone I've had on the Morning Scoop a couple times, he filed a Freedom of Information Act request with a bunch of schools to get all sorts of documents related to this. I'm probably going to try and have him on the Morning Scoop at some point to talk about this, because he did it. It was a fantastic story he wrote about it. One of the things he mentioned specifically with Ohio State was, it was always a little bit annoying that you would have Ohio State helmets and they would just all have the Buckeye stickers on them. They are going to make it so the beginning of the season, there's no Buckeye stickers on the helmet. And then throughout the course of the year, as these guys have better seasons and, you're winning games and you're putting up big stats, you're having progressively more and more Buckeye stickers on the helmet during the course of the year. That I thought was pretty cool. I think you've got, I would like to see storming the fields. I don't remember, they never did that, right? People storming the fields at the end of the game in a big win, and then you get extremely mad, like no one would storm the field for beating Penn State. Come on, lots of that kind of narrative. Matt actually had the best answer, which was LSU fans screaming at the band to play the song "Neck" at the end of a big win. Which just Google LSU "Neck" band, and there's the fans have a very creative chant there for it, and it is one of college football's most colorful and frequently fined traditions. So that I thought was a very good one.
On the complete opposite end of that, I saw today that Iowa, who has the tradition of the children in the cancer hospital waving down and both teams waving up and the stands waving up to the children, they used to play the same song over and over, but now they are going to allow the child captain that day to choose the song. So whatever song you want to play as they do this.
Wheels on the Bus.
So, and then you get to hear maybe the entire crowd singing "Wheels on the Bus." So I thought that was a neat addition to a tradition that is now 5 years old, I believe. Tom, I would to go back to the LSU, the SEC type of stuff. I would like to see the Ole Miss touchdown celebration of the mimicking a dog taking a leak. Like anytime, it doesn't have to be in the Egg Bowl. It's just anytime Ole Miss scores, here they go. They're mimicking taking a leak like a dog.
I am just really hoping that we can make a couple of these things come together, and then the Iowa children's captain asks the band to play "Neck" at the end of the first quarter. That's what I really, really want now, more than anything in the world. That's like world peace. No, that can wait. I want "Neck" at the end of the first quarter in Kinnick Stadium.
What about streakers?
I was thinking about Rolling Tumors Corner, which is a little more wholesome than streakers. Yeah, Anthony Schlegel choking out some guy who ran on the field. We were at I don't want to say which Columbus area restaurant we were at earlier this week during a break during camp, but it was a fun casual joint, and they had a signed picture of Anthony Schlegel on the wall from that exact moment when the guy had run on the field. It was like, well, that is a very specific moment in time right there. So yeah, that was a fun one.
I've got two more. One, old-timey, stealing mascots. It could be like a side quest where you're going to go and steal, the LSU Tiger or something like that. So like you could do some stuff with this. As the game got into its later years, they were really making recruiting complicated, overly complicated in some senses. So if you want to make a complicated game, you can have side quests like this: stealing a ram, stealing a tiger, stealing, I don't know, like a statue, or like painting statues and stuff like that, or the Tennessee Rock or whatever, just stuff like that, side quests.
Mike the Tiger, in terms of the mascot stealing, I think Mike the Tiger is the final boss. I think you've got to go through a lot of other mascot thefts before you start stealing a tiger. It's like start with the Auburn Eagle maybe, and work your way up to the Colorado State Ram, and eventually you get to like Ralphie. Ralphie's probably next to last, the Colorado Buffalo, and then go with God and go get Mike the Tiger. Best of luck.
What if you have to tame Ralphie to ride him into battle to get Mike the Tiger?
This sounds like Red Dead Redemption 3 college football. I love it.
My last one, Tom. Allowing it's the tradition of Michigan choosing whether or not to actually play the Ohio State game. So before the game, you'll be prompted, do you want to play this game? And they will have the option of saying yes or no. I think that would be a fitting addition to the game.
Choices: yes, no, or too soon. Here's me mashing the too soon button. Way, way, way too soon. Last one from Matt S. Bucks 87. Where's the best place to sit in Ohio Stadium? I feel like you could ask 30 people this question and you get 30 different answers. I have no one. You could ask 105,000 people and no one would say that. I would say, for me, I've always loved the first row of C-deck right in the middle of the field. If you're in the first or second row of C-deck on like the 40-yard line, the 50-yard line, you have a great view of the stadium, a great view of the field. I have always liked that, and that's not, the real low seats like AA deck. A lot of times those are, people really want them because you're right behind the bench and it's great, and it's like, yeah, but you can't, like, as someone who's down on the field a good bit, let me tell you, being low to the field, you lose a lot of perspective on what's happening on the other side of the field, and there's a lot of people between you and the the action in a lot of cases. I always prefer, if I'm just sitting watching a game, being a little further up. Close to midfield is always nice, but that I think is where I would pick. What about you?
Exactly correct. There's a reason television chooses that seat, essentially the high up midfield, because it's the best view. And to have nobody in front of you, if you're in that first row, that's great. You see everything. When I was a student, I had season tickets in A deck, and I would get further and further closer from like the end zone to like that 5 or 10 yard line was all the further I got out. But the further up you can get, but as a student in Block O, I do remember sitting in Block O. The later you get there, the higher you got to sit, which made it smart to arrive later. Because if you're in like the first row of Block O in the end zone, you're not seeing anything. And so, yeah, I've never been in South Stands. In 2006, there was a friend of the Ozone who had season tickets, and he had like 4 season tickets, and he would let me use one for every game that season, except for Michigan. But they were like first row of B deck undercover, and they were pretty outstanding as well. Like it was at the 40 yard line. So that's hard to beat as well. But I'm with you. If you can be first row C deck at the 50, that's, as long as it's not 100 degrees like North Carolina State in 2003 or whatever, that's a tough place to beat.
Yeah, I was up in D deck for that North Carolina State game in 2003, which is good because I was even closer to the sun. So I'm sure it was like 3 degrees hotter up there than it was down on the field. Yeah, boy, you get up to the top of D deck, and I mean, you're getting up to almost press box height. Ohio State's press box is crazy, crazy high, but you at some point there's a negative return. Where all of a sudden, okay, now you're 40 rows higher than the front row of C deck, and now all of a sudden it's like, now I'm pretty far from the field. So yeah, back of A deck or B deck, not B deck, not underneath with poles in the way, but the top end of the top side of A deck, the very front of B deck, or the very front of C deck, I think are probably your best options. And I've sat in the north end of the horseshoe, the close end of the horseshoe, kind of towards the front of C deck, and those are still, you get a good view from there as well. Those are that's like when you go to a hockey game, you have the real hockey purists who will tell you actually you want to be sitting in the corner so you can really see the breakouts develop and that kind of stuff. You kind of get some of the same stuff with football as well, not obviously to the same degree as hockey, but you can see certain stuff. You can see line play developing in some ways in a little bit of a better way there. So yeah, that's another possibility, another reasonable answer there. But yeah, overall, if you can sit between the 40s in the first couple of rows of C deck, that's I think my answer.
Higher is always better than lower, in my opinion. If you're interested in watching, like you said, things develop. Like if you want to see that guy was open and Stroud didn't throw it, I like being able to see everything. Tom, did we defeat the listeners?
We did, well, almost. We have one from at Isaac McIntyre who asked a good enough question that we're going to do a whole show on it at some point. So we don't want to, when you ask us great questions, we don't want to, if it is a 30-minute question or a 45-minute question, we do not want to cheat you and give you a 5-minute answer. So we'll do a whole show on that at some point in the next couple weeks. But yes, for now, everyone else has been conquered.
Let that be a lesson. Ask 45-minute questions if you want us to talk extensively about it. But thank you all for submitting those. We have finally gotten through all of them, save for that last one, which means we'll probably be asking for more in about a week. So just keep that in mind as you're spending time with your family. Keep that in the back of your mind. Oh, I've got to remember some questions to ask Tom and Tony. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.